Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into one of the most pressing crises gripping the UK economy: sky-high energy costs and the devastating impact they're having on our heavy industries. From steel to chemicals to ceramics, entire sectors are warning they may not survive unless urgent action is taken. In this committee hearing, business leaders lay it all bare. And trust me, the revelations about competitiveness, supply chains, and government policy are explosive. Stick around, because what you're about to hear will change the way you think about Britain's industrial future.
If you can say who you are and where you're from.
Everyone, I'm Beth Barker from the Aldersgate Group. We're a multi-stakeholder alliance of businesses, civil society organisations and academic institutions, and we work collectively to push for a competitive and sustainable economy.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, my name is Arjan Geveke. I'm director of the Energy Intensive Users Group, and that's a group of the most energy intensive manufacturing industries in the UK.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Mitchell. I'm representing the Chemical Industries Association, which is a trade body representing chemical and pharmaceutical businesses here in the UK.
Well, thank you all very much. You are extremely welcome, and I have some questions to start our session where we want to assess the impact of high energy costs on large and heavy industry. Where do high energy costs rank in the list of concerns facing UK heavy industry today? You'd like to start with that? Maybe, and that's a good one for the energy intensive industries group to go first with.
Almost by definition the highest.
Yeah.
The hint is in the name. Obviously there are some other issues as well for energy intensive industries, but because of the nature of the electricity and gas consumption, the cost of energy ranks the highest. My members do survey basically the energy intensive industry companies about what the major issues are regularly, and I'm sure David can explain for the chemical industry, but across the board, energy costs, in particular electricity costs, rank the highest.
Yeah, I'd agree with that entirely. Our members have consistently said for very many years that energy is their number one critical business survival issue, far and above any other factor impacting their business.
Thank you very much. And Beth Barker, your members' views?
Yeah, very similar. It's as the other panelists have said, there are other challenges and obviously other things that can be done, but high energy costs really rank the highest, and this is not a new issue. It's been going on for some time, but it's become more acute recently, and I think it's really important to think about how it impacts. It's not just the actual impact of the costs, but of course relative to other countries, and that's where it comes to the competitiveness point.
And how far is the actual cost of energy the problem, and how far is the challenge one of competitiveness, because the costs are higher than elsewhere, as you've just been saying? I was going to start with Arjan because you just touched on it. Yeah.
At the moment, you may have picked it up in the media, it is leading to severe pressure up to the point that some businesses will have to close. You're probably familiar with steel, in particular British Steel, which has more or less been, the government has taken over management of the company. They have been struggling partly due to gas, energy prices as well. I'll leave David to explain what's in the chemicals, but certainly in glass, we had recently the closure of Nippon Electric Glass in the UK because of unable to compete on glass, the manufacture of glass fibers compared to other countries. Ceramics has seen a raft of closures as well, like Royal Stafford, Heraldic Pottery, Johnson Tiles has moved production as well. And these are the closures that are actually in the media. What has happened as well is that a lot of energy industries, because of these prices, have just stopped part of their production, which don't immediately pop up in the media, but they're not using their full capacity and they're invested in, and that's not sustainable in the longer term.
Thank you. And David Mitchell, I know that your organisation used the word crisis to describe the fall in output in the chemicals industry.
Yep.
is this about competitiveness internationally because of energy prices?
It's absolutely that. It's international competitiveness. The UK used to have a pretty significant competitive advantage globally for the petrochem sector. We, by definition, are energy intensive. Bunsen burners on the desks were there for a reason back in our chemistry lessons. You need heat and you need significant quantities of heat. So we're both electro-intensive, gas-intensive, and obviously with being gas-intensive, you bear the carbon costs associated with the consumption of gas. But in addition, we also use gas as a feedstock. So we crack some of the gases, the methanes, the ethanes, your hydrocarbons, to make the building blocks of everything we have today, everything that goes into the aerospace industry, the construction industry, renewables such as windmills, the polymers, the plastics, the coatings, food packaging. You almost can't live without chemistry. And at the moment we face some of the most expensive costs globally. And obviously with multinational businesses, we've seen closure after closure after closure of historic production facilities in the UK, particularly those that are energy intensive, whether it be gas or power or both, because many members are actually intensive on all fuels, gas and power. So there are some pretty major brands out there, pretty major names out there that have closed. You'll have seen in the press the closure of the ammonia production plant in Teesside. That was the last remaining ammonia and nitrogen fertilizer production plant in the UK. They're American.
And here's where the tension really heats up. We just heard about British Steel, Nippon Electric Glass, and entire ceramics factories shutting their doors. This isn't just about rising bills. It's about the UK losing its industrial backbone. David Mitchell from the Chemical Industries Association calls it a crisis, pointing out that we've gone from being a chemical powerhouse to shutting down ammonia plants and importing the basics. Think about that. Fertilizer, glass, plastics, all critical to our supply chains, now reliant on imports. Meanwhile, government ministers insist their support packages are enough. But if the costs in the UK are 3 times higher than in America, how can our industries possibly compete? Viewers, what do you think? Is this simply market forces at work, or a failure of government strategy to protect jobs and sovereignty?
The parent company took the decision to cease production and move to importing. If you've got gas, pick a number over in America for sort of 30 pence equivalent, and we're currently paying today somewhere between 80 and £1. During the gas crisis, we were paying £4, and you've got to add into that transportation fees, levies, carbon costs. It just doesn't stack up. So we've seen closure after closure. The cracker in Teesside was recently announced by the SABIC as permanent closure in the UK, again moving to imports, cracking of ethane, and to make your PEs, your polymers, your ethylenes, your plastic pipes that serve all of our utility companies, our gas and water businesses that depend on those plastic pipes. The foundation building block is now going to be imported. So it has major supply chain effects. If you take out the core production of some of your base case chemicals, the impact on your supply chains and the impact on other businesses that utilise the products is pretty significant. It's like the argument for batteries. If you can get battery production in the UK, with it will inevitably come the production of cars and vehicles, and the same is true of chemicals. Clearly the chemicals feeds the batteries, but the analogy is true.
Yeah, there are some who argue, not necessarily represented today in this committee, that this doesn't matter because as long as we can import what we need, everything's fine. What's your response to that?
It's an argument, it's an economic argument, but ultimately it depends what you want in the UK. It depends what you want as if you want your foundation businesses and you want good, strong employment in STEM sectors, engineering. You know, if you want the added value, we were a major exporter. We had about 1% GDP to the UK as it stands. That was clearly a much bigger number a number of years ago. There is an argument for supporting these businesses, ensuring we have our competitive advantages because of the consequential impacts across the wider economy.
Thank you. Beth Parker.
Just wanted to add the additional point that our foundation industries provide lots of really good above average paid jobs across the regions, and that's a really important point when we're looking at future proofing our industry for the future, and so that's why it plays a really important role in our economy. And I also wanted to add an additional point around competitiveness, that it's not just about the kind of day-to-day operational competitive, it's also about competition for investment, and energy costs where they are a lot higher than other regions leads to us losing out on investment, both of the businesses that are international, have sites all over the world, but also from financial organisations.
Thank you. Mike Reader.
I think I was just going to pick up on the point you made, Chair. The point you make about when we lose our sovereign production, we then have to go overseas. Obviously, some of the, particularly the chemicals, that puts us in quite a difficult position with the supply chain. So when industry is thinking about energy costs, do you see enough from government also on the impact of supply chain resilience, particularly, let's say, fertilisers, which now come from Russia and Turkey and countries that maybe have a lot more volatility in recent years? Does that conversation come in as well when you're talking as a business about where you invest?
Little. Just to expand, I'm an ex-civil servant, so I've been involved in those resilience discussions while I was in government, in particular around Brexit and COVID. Then there is a flurry of activities within government to analyse the supply chain and to identify those materials that are crucial for the economy. But as long as when the crisis dissipates, that whole knowledge and awareness disappears.
Is it fair to say, from what you've been saying in the last few minutes, that these high energy prices are a matter of national security because of the impact on supply chains and the other points you made?
That's a big call, but it's certainly important. But from my CA colleague, probably is.
Yeah, I think one of the major lessons we all learnt through the COVID crisis was the importance of supply chains and the criticality of short link supply chains, and resilience and depending on importation is a fundamental decision for governments in terms of how reliant they want to be on other countries, particularly for some of their core products. If I can just go back to the point on decarbonisation and self-sufficiency on fuels and the impact of the environment, electrification is a major way of unlocking the decarbonisation of all sectors, including ours. You can substitute gas for electricity, you can create heat from electricity, and technologies from heat pumps and high temperature heat pumps and alternatives to gas do exist. The problem and the reason it's holding it back is you just cannot develop a business case for investing further in existing plants, further capital at a price of tens, if not hundreds of millions, when you don't have a core business case for operating in the first place. If you could get the business case for electrification by lowering the price of electricity and you could compete internationally, it's a no-brainer. You would deliver much lower carbon end solutions to consumers.
Thank you very much. Annalise Midgley.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for coming in and giving evidence to us. I'm going to ask a few questions to all of you about the recently published industrial strategy and some of your views on that in terms of what it says about energy costs. So just to start off with, the industrial strategy was published a couple of weeks ago and included in it a range of existing and new ways to reduce industrial energy bills, and I'd just be interested to hear your views on those proposals.
Yeah, so if I go first, what we welcomed was the continuation of the schemes to compensate certain energy tenderings for the indirect emission costs due to the carbon pricing. So that's a long-standing compensation scheme that government has in place. So that got confirmed in industrial strategy. And the other thing we welcomed was the increase in the network charge compensation scheme to compensate certain energy tenderings for the relatively high network charges. Probably what you have in mind is the British Industry Competitors Scheme. That scheme doesn't impact on the most energy-intensive industries, i.e. my members.
Right.
Most of them, at least.
Okay. David?
All forms of support in trying to level the playing field internationally are clearly welcome. The existing schemes and the extension of the existing schemes, the EII electro-intensive schemes to very, very electro-intensive businesses is very much welcome. We've got about 30 members in receipt of that. I think there's about 200 businesses who get that package. The problem is it is only a handful of organisations, 200. We've got 29 million electricity consumers. It's only targeted at electro costs. It's not targeted at heat costs coming from gas and carbon. So it's one measure. The latest announcement clearly extends it further above and beyond the existing pool of electro-intensive, so more businesses who are high consumers but not intensive consumers will get some form of funding. But all we're doing is redistributing money around. Ultimately, other consumers end up picking up the bill. The bill doesn't shrink. So whilst it's welcome, it isn't curing the problem. The problem is we have fundamentally too high energy costs in this country, and all consumers bear the cost of that, whether it's gas or power. Consumers are buying heat. They are buying heat as a product, with the exception of those that use methane as a feedstock. People just want, what is the cost of heat? What is the cost of generating that heat? And we need to be internationally competitive, and it needs to be affordable. It's really quite simple. We need to crack the fundamental cause behind it, rather than trying to tick off and add sticking plasters to certain parts of the problem. Because the exemptions, the existing exemptions of things like network charges, levies, the environmental levies, some of the subsidies for things like feed-in tariff, it only sorts part of the problem.
What is that? What would your recommendations and solutions be to get to the nub of the...
We need a fundamental rethink of policy. We need to invest more and more in electrical generation. We need to shift the supply and demand balance. We need a surplus of cheap, affordable, secure power, which will enable electrification, it will enable decarbonisation, and it will enable us to compete. Until such time as we have a surplus of electricity or much greater volume of electricity generation, renewable generation, prices simply will not come down. We've moved already as a nation from one fuel to another. We went from wood to coal, from coal to oil. In the 70s we went from oil to natural gas in the 80s. We need to make the same step change into electricity. But the reason we changed before we moved was because it was abundant and affordable. The problem is it just isn't. As we stand, electricity isn't today.
Beth, what is your view on it, and what your other panellists have said as well?
Yeah, I mean, we were really delighted by a lot of the announcements in the industrial strategy, and we were particularly pleased to see net zero at the heart, and also foundation industries really well linked in to the growing sectors. We definitely recognise that particularly the announcements around Network and the British Industry Competitive Scheme are great starts at making electricity costs more competitive. But we have questions around the funding, and as other panellists have talked about, how those costs are distributed, where they're met. I think there are also questions around the scale. Is it soon enough, and is it enough? In the document it references 7,000 businesses. That's a small proportion, something in the region of 3%. So I think of the businesses, industrial businesses. So I think those are, we've got key questions. So in terms of what we would recommend, and going forward, we think it's really important that the government publishes the consultations relevant to these announcements as soon as possible, and undertake really thorough engagement with industry about whether it will deliver the competitiveness aim that it outlines. We were really pleased to see some of the other announcements around corporate PPAs, connections, supply chains. And what's important as the government undertakes these consultations is to understand how these package of measures work together to support industry in different ways. I would also really like to add that there was nothing in there that we've already spoken about around really scaling up electrification. And so we would push the government to look at how it will support industrial electrification through targeted measures that really make it competitive. And with upcoming policy around the refresh of the industrial decarbonisation strategy and also the carbon budget delivery plans, we feel that there's really good upcoming opportunities to say more on the long-term vision around this. And finally, I would say, and this relates to the point around how we deal with the different costs, is that high electricity prices are of course a challenge for businesses and for other consumers and obviously households, and electrification is something that needs to be taken across the board, and so we have to think carefully across the system how different measures, exemptions, discounts, support stack up to drive that change across the system.
So what did we learn from today's fiery exchange? Business leaders are clear. Government schemes are welcome, but they're just sticking plasters. The core issue is Britain's fundamentally high energy costs, and until that changes, industries will continue to bleed jobs, investment, and competitiveness to rivals overseas. This debate isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It's about national security, supply chain resilience, and whether the UK still has a future as an industrial power. Now over to you. Do you think the government's industrial strategy is enough, or is Britain sleepwalking into deindustrialization? Let us know in the comments, and if you found this debate as explosive as we did, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with others, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping UK political breakdowns.